You're listening to episode 51 of Literacy in Color. Today, I'm joined by Pryor Rayburn, also known as Orton Gillingham Mama. She's a fellow in training with the Orton Gillingham Academy, a certified academic language therapist, and co-author of Ready Reader Decodables. Pryor currently serves as a director of associate OG training at the Key Learning Center and creates structured literacy resources and online courses to support educators across the country. With a rich background as a classroom teacher and OG tutor, Pryor brings a deep knowledge and heart to this work. She's also a past president of the North Carolina branch of the IDA and a passionate advocate for students with dyslexia. Today, we're rethinking sight word instruction, breaking down misconceptions, revisiting the research, and exploring brain-friendly ways to make high-frequency words stick. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am so excited to be joined by my friend, Pryor Rayburn. She's also known as the Orton Gillingham Mama, and she is so knowledgeable on all things structured literacy and truly a trusted voice before this whole science of reading movement gained popularity. So we can trust what she has to say about a lot of practices, and I'm excited to chat with her today about sight words and high frequency words and all those buzzwords that we hear these days. So first of all, welcome to the show, Pryor.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So before we get started, can you share a little introduction about yourself and where you fit into this whole structured literacy world?
Sure, yes. So right now I am a fellow in training with the Orton Gillingham Academy. So I help train educators in the Orton Gillingham approach. That is helping me go really deep into, the science of reading, structured literacy, the Orton Gillingham approach, just the English language as a whole. So I'm really loving hearing where teachers are struggling in the classroom, how Orton Gillingham is helping them in the classroom as reading specialists, one-on-one, tutoring, kind of the whole umbrella. So that's one piece. And then I also create resources that I sell both on TPT and in my website and do online courses as well, just to help teachers continue in their professional learning.
I love it. And I feel so lucky I got to meet you in person and give you a squeeze at the Reading League. It was so fun to connect with just so many like-minded educators in this realm, just really trying to plug away and really change the world, just try to change things. And I think that you have a lot of knowledge and great content to offer. So today, we're going to be chatting about sight words, and this is a point of contention for a lot of people because there's a lot of confusion still around what a sight word is exactly. So we hear a lot of terminology out there like sight words and high frequency words, and in Orton Gillingham, we have red words, and now there's heart words. People say flash words. We have all of these terms, but what do they all mean? Are they all the same? Maybe you can take a moment to define some of these things for us.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that because I would hate to be explaining one term and the teachers or whoever's listening to this has another idea in their head. So that's a great question. Sight word is any word that a student or adult can read automatically, so without sounding it out. That includes both regular and irregular words. I know that might be a point of confusion. So in my lexicon, I have tens of thousands of words that I can read by sight. This could be dog, table, computer, or even the word photosynthesis. So my brain has decoded those words and mapped them sufficiently so that I can read them automatically as if by sight. Now, high frequency words are the most commonly used words in written English. So these are words, they're often small, like the, or was, and. Some follow all of the expected spelling patterns, and some, like the irregular word again, do not. Now, heart words or red words, as you mentioned, are really just catchy terms used in different programs, usually for those high frequency and or irregular words that have tricky parts that students need to learn, and I'm putting this in air quotes, know by heart. I refer to those as irregular words. But remember, I think it's important for people to know that we want all high frequency words to become sight words through a cognitive process called orthographic mapping. So I hope that helps kind of explain the difference. And there's a lot of overlap in those. So I also think that's where some of the confusion comes from.
Yeah. And one of the things with the heart word method, when the science of reading movement was starting to gain popularity, I see everyone putting hearts on everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just like memorization. Now you're just saying like, memorize this whole word. We shouldn't see these hearts plastered everywhere. It really should be for those sound spelling correspondences that are tricky, not necessarily just willy-nilly all over the place.
Totally agree.
So I know as a lot of educators rely on memorization for teaching high frequency words. This has been common practice for decades. And I'm in my science of reading bubble. I feel like people don't do that anymore, but they really, truly do, getting the lists of words. And as people shift to be aligned more so with reading research, from your perspectives, what's some of the limitations with memorization?
I think the biggest piece is that memorization doesn't stick for most kids, and especially those with, dyslexia or other reading difficulties. I'm sure you've seen this with your child. I know I've seen it as a teacher and with my own children. They can memorize a word for the test on Friday, and then by Monday, it's gone. And with hundreds of high frequency words, trying to memorize each one as a whole just isn't realistic or brain friendly. Often seen in classrooms, students drawing the shape of a high frequency or a regular word to help them remember it. But what I want people to take away from this is when we draw shapes around words or ask students to memorize them as a whole unit, we're encouraging the brain to memorize the word as a picture and not as a word with individual sounds and letters. And because of the great work of, I always say, these very smart researchers, we know that skilled readers don't use visual memory with pictures to remember words. They do for letters, but not for words. So skilled readers instantly recognize words in any font or shape, color, or size. And that's because they have mapped the specific letter sequence in a word to the individual sounds of that word. And this has really nothing to do with the visual image. It's hard to explain on a podcast, so I'm going to ask the listeners to imagine. So imagine the word brain written out in lowercase letters. Now imagine that word written out in lowercase cursive letters. The letters look quite different with that funky B and R and all the connected letters. Now rewrite that same word in all caps and maybe make it with bubble letters. So if you have orthographically mapped that word through decoding it and attending to each letter and sound in the word, then you will automatically be able to recognize that written word and its meaning regardless of the word's shape or the font. So that's kind of a long-winded answer back to your original question. If we encourage our students to try and memorize a word by its shape or as an image, we're really robbing them of the chance they need to connect the sounds in the word to the letters that represent those sounds.
Yeah. And when we think about memorizing a word as an image, that's what poor readers do.
Exactly.
You can do it. It can happen, but you can only memorize so many. And your brain doesn't have the capacity to do these tens of thousands of words, like you were saying, that we have as literate adults. So it's just a strategy that will tap out eventually. And by the time students are in third grade, a lot of the crutches go away, the pictures go away, the words are smaller, there's more words on the page, the words are multisyllabic, multimorphemic, there's long letter strings in there, and it's just not efficient. It's not efficient to learn how to read. So I think it's really important that we take that brain research with us and make sure that we're approaching things the right way, the way the brain actually learns how to read. And as we're shifting from memorization to mapping, you mentioned this cognitive process of orthographic mapping. What's happening in that reading brain that's facilitating this mapping process?
I would argue that that's where it gets really cool. Now, my kids would say that's because I'm a self-proclaimed word nerd, but it really is very cool what's going on in the brain. You mentioned the orthographic mapping. So I'll start there. Dr. Linnea Airy coined the term orthographic mapping, really to explain how words are stored in our long-term memory for instant recognition. That's kind of the easiest way to put it. Her research shows that kids don't just memorize whole words. As we mentioned, they're connecting. And I imagine this for the listeners kind of as a triangle. The phonemes at the bottom to the letters they see, or the graphemes. And then at the top of the triangle, connect those to the word's meaning. And then once that connection, that triangle is made in practice, the word becomes anchored in the brain. And that's what gives us a true sight word. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the research of Dr. Stanislas Dehaene. He's a cognitive neuroscientist. I just think he's amazing. And he's studied what's happening in the reading brain in general. So he's found that skilled readers activate a region in the brain that he refers to as the visual word form area. So basically, it's like the brain's the fast lane for recognizing written words. But that fast lane only develops through explicit instruction that connects, there's that triangle again, the speech sounds to the graphemes, and then connecting to that meaning. And although that part of the brain is very near where the brain processes those visual images and pictures, we know it's not the same part of the brain. And we know this because very cool brain scan shows us what parts of the brain light up when attending to those different tasks. So for example, I always loved reading about this. When a reader sees a picture of a chair and sees the word chair written out, different parts of the brain light up. And on top of that, the reader's brain more quickly recognizes, that written word chair when compared to the picture of a chair. I mean, I think that's so cool. So now that we know that accessing those orthographically mapped words like chair is more efficient, we definitely don't want to encourage students to memorize words as a whole. That would be so much more laborious and inefficient. And as you mentioned, as they start getting older and into more complex text, there are going to be words that are unknown. So they need to be in the decoding practice. And also the really amazing part of orthographic mapping is it's not just at the word level. Students are orthographically mapping familiar letter strings. So they're able to take what they mapped in one word and apply it to new words. So it just has this wonderful snowball effect to help them become more effective readers.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you talked about this snowball effect, because then that leads to more research. We have David Scher's self-teaching hypothesis, and obviously we can't teach every single word under the sun. There has to be a point where students have such a grasp of the code and how it works, and that they have these strings mapped in their brain, that they're making sense of their language and they're kind of teaching themselves, how these words work. And they use that flexibility and shifting of the vowel sounds and all of these things to decode some of these sophisticated words. So it really is so cool. I know when you're talking about the brain, I'm like smiling here the whole time because I think it's fascinating. And I think that all teachers need to know this information. Any stakeholder who is involved with teaching students how to read, they need to know how the brain operates. And it's really, really important information. So I appreciate you sharing with such passion.
Oh my gosh, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So we mentioned before, but there's a lot of popular approaches now to teaching high frequency words, like the heart word method. And I'm a fan of the heart word method. I think it's helpful. There are some things that are missing from a lot of these popular approaches. So I know that you have pinpointed some of these things, so maybe you could share them with us.
Sure. And I know you mentioned earlier about the heart word method. And I first want to say, I think the heart is very cute and it's lovable. There's no research around an actual heart. So just also use structured flexibility. But I think one thing I've seen in classrooms and in teachers over and over using the heart word method is that it's a great job of identifying the unexpected or irregular part of a word, but teachers often skip over the whole rest of the word, which is often decodable. And we don't want to ignore those parts. We want to explicitly bring our students' attention to those expected letter sound correspondences. Like in the irregular word from, for example, the unexpected part is the O saying Since it's a closed syllable, we would expect it to say ah. So the heart word method teaches the student to heart that irregular part. But if you take that extra time to show the students that the other three graphemes do have their expected letter sound correspondences, they can more easily attend to each one of those when reading and spelling the word. And I've seen students physically like go, oh, aha, when understanding in that word, for example, that 3 out of the 4 graphemes do have their expected sounds. That's 75% of the word is decodable. That lays the groundwork to help the student decode the word and not to compensate with guessing or trying to memorize it. And those are the types of decoding opportunities that we need to provide our students in order to have them orthographically map the word. So that's one piece. The other piece that I mentioned when we were talking about orthographically mapping, connecting the phonemes and the graphemes helps us attend to the meaning. So many times with this heart word method or just other methods that I've seen, they're leaving out the crucial piece of discussing the word's meaning. And for those of you who are listening going, well, why does that matter? I'm telling you, this is the missing piece to help those students, especially those that skip over words, like those small high frequency words or substitute. I don't think I've ever sat down with a reader and a struggling reader, and they don't substitute or skip over some words. It's because we haven't taught their brain that those words do hold meaning. So that's kind of another missing piece that I found makes the world of difference when teaching sight words.
100%. And circling back to the first thing you said, I love how you talked about paying closer attention to the parts that are completely decodable. And I am pulling this statistic out of my brain. I hope I'm correct, but I remember reading in Denise Eads' Logic of English, she was spewing out some of those percentages. 50% of our English language is completely regular. And then it was something like 86%, maybe. I hope.
I think you're right. I know it's 86, 87. I'm with you. I know that percentage as well.
Most words are completely regular, except for one sound spelling correspondence might be off, and it's typically that vowel sound. So I think we need to bring more of our attention to the parts that are irregular to make sense of that, to show our students there is a logic to our English. A lot of times those vowels are tricky and those parts will need a little extra attention, but we do have to reinforce the fact that our language is pretty consistent if we do know the generalizations out there. And I really appreciate what you said about meaning, because I feel like I'm often on my soapbox about that as well. And when we think about this whole theory of orthographic mapping, all the work that Dr. Linnea and Dr. Katie Pace-Miles put out there, it's not just the sounds and the letters, it's the meaning attached too. And it's this connection between all three. And I think there's another science of reading model out there, Seidenberg's triangle of rote reading fluency.
The context at the top.
Yeah. And so we need to build this glue between all three of these things in order to solidify that in our brain. And I think a lot of times when we don't have that strong understanding of all three parts, it's going to fall flat. And a lot of our high frequency words are not meaty in meaning. what we call function words. But there is a way to understand, how they function in a sentence and how they operate in our language.
I'm so glad you said that. And that's exactly kind of what I teach my trainees now is just, to your point, what could you add to the heart word approach is a very brief conversation about the word and using it in context. What you just mentioned, McClellan and Seidenberg, I think it was from 1986, the 4-part processing model. The meaning and context are so crucial. So even understanding those function words that you mentioned that don't really hold a ton of meaning on their own, even thinking of the high frequency words or regular words, to and from, taking the time to explain both of those meanings to your students as you're explicitly teaching them and how they're kind of opposites. I can mail a letter to Michelle, and then I might receive a letter from Michelle, and talking with a student about, what does that look like? Come is usually from one location to be closer to you. And just that, even that probably took 20 seconds for me to explain, but that's giving that anchoring meaning to those words that the students are often missing. And that's why their brain might not be attending to them correctly when they read them. So they might skip them or substitute for a visually similar word.
That is so helpful. And I know we're in podcast form, but Pryor's even gesturing with her hands and like bringing her hands closer to her chest and moving them away. And all of that helps words stick in the brain. I love, love, love all of that. What are some other small tweaks that maybe educators can make to help their students truly master our high frequency words?
I think the biggest thing, because it makes more sense for the orthographic patterns. And I know I've heard you mention this on a previous podcast episode, but I'm very intentional about organizing these high frequency words and irregular words by their phonics pattern. Again, it helps with overwhelm for the teachers that either you have a list or your school has given you a list to try to work through and to make sense of it. It helps you make sense. For example, if you are teaching the phonics pattern with digraphs, perhaps you start weaving in words like this and those to do more explicit work with, because then they're not going to be viewed as something like in a box, this irregular word that I have to memorize. But if it's a meaningful part of the phonics instruction that you're already doing, it makes more sense for you. It keeps overwhelm down, and it definitely makes more sense for the students because, again, it's focusing their attention on, in the word this, oh yes, TH does say th, and it's hard to say on a podcast. And that's what we're working on, in class.
That's a game changer. I think that's so helpful if schools haven't already organized their high frequency words to align with their phonics instruction. That should be on your summer to-do list because it really is such a great way to help make that connection. You're learning something along the code. These are some words that fit right in that scope. So can you provide maybe a specific example of how you'd approach teaching a high frequency word to ensure that it sticks?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, model your Orton Gillingham Mama magic.
I know. I love that. Well, and as you mentioned, I'm incapable of teaching without using my hands. So if you were seeing me, I'm using my hands. And then a part of this is very visual. So but I will try to explain what I would be doing. So let's take the irregular word that I mentioned maybe earlier. I said to and from. Let's use the word come. If I was going to teach this irregular word, I would be teaching it alongside the silent E spelling pattern. So if I was working on that in the classroom, this is one that I would bring in. So first, as we talked about, I would use it aloud in context to help students make meaning of the word. So I could use it in a sentence like, my dog will come home when it is time for dinner. The student echoes the word. Then I would have the student segment the sounds. So I like using tapping. So k, m. Then the student would connect those phonemes. Those are the sounds to the graphemes. Those are the letters that represent each sound as they read the word on paper. So it'd be the C, the O, the M, and the E. The C would be mapped with the k sound, the O mapped with the and the M and the E mapped together for the sound. Again, I do love bringing some visual attention to that vowel sound that is irregular. In this word, the O saying is unexpected. We would expect it to have a long O sound because of that silent E. And then again, one piece that I see that, you've worked so hard with the heart word method, but then if you stop there, no, the student has to read it and spell it, use it in context. So they could read or spell phrases like, come here, come again, or my friends can come to the party. Those small additional steps of application really support that, again, cognitive process of orthographic mapping by connecting the phonemes to the graphemes and to the word's meaning, used in context. And remember that meaning piece is often that missing piece, and it can make all the difference. And then lastly, don't forget to then weave in that word into everything you're going to be doing for the next several weeks. It could be in the directions. It could be part of homework. It could be on your morning message. As many times as you give your students to connect the sounds and the graphemes, the better.
That's so helpful. And I love the example with all of that context woven in, because I think a lot of times we work with words in isolation and we leave it there and we never bring it back to how is this word actually used in our language. So I love all of the different types of examples too, because then it opens kids' brains to seeing, oh, this isn't the only way this word is used. It could be used this way and that way as well. So I think all of that is really valuable to your instruction. And I appreciate you mentioning that. Bring it back. Let's spiral a review, cumulative review. Make sure you're always weaving it in there. And when we think about the orthographic mapping process too, if you map a word, you're never going to forget it. Like you can't forget
Amazing
word.
I mean, let me tell you how many times I forget people's faces or names. Unfortunately, all the time. But a word that I've mapped, I'm unable to see it and not think of the meaning. It's pretty amazing.
Like I'm looking at the calendar right now. I can't not read the word May. It's just
No, it's amazing.
And it's for our kids too. So many times we give these assessments of high frequency words and it's like, oh, they forgot these words, or the score went down from one year to the next or one semester to the next. And that's because it wasn't mapped. And
it wasn't mapped. And, I didn't mention this, but another part of that context, and now I'm thinking of Scarborough's reading rope, is the context piece is a beautiful opportunity to help them access their background knowledge as well. The word May, for example, if they've read a calendar or, any time that they can make sense of it and you use their background knowledge to help anchor that word meaning, they're definitely going to be more likely to, orthographically map it as well.
Yeah, 100%. We have so many of those multiple meaning words in our language. So would you approach teaching high frequency words differently with kindergarten students versus perhaps upper elementary students? Or do you adapt your approach for different types of words, or is your routine fairly consistent?
I think in general, we now know, because again, of those wonderfully smart researchers, that generally all brains, neurotypical and dyslexic brains are going to store these words in the same manner. So we want to be bringing their attention to the phonemes, the graphemes, and using that word in context with the meaning. Now, with that said, with very young learners, thinking those students in kindergarten, I would caution about pushing too many high frequency words and irregular words too early, because their brains have likely not developed through what, Dr. Airy describes as the phases of word reading. So until their brains can accurately and automatically manipulate sounds, there's that phonemic awareness piece, their brains will not be ready to work through those demanding tasks required for orthographic mapping. So as a result, and this is a caution, especially for kindergarten teachers or for those parents who, think in preschool, my child has learned 20 sight words. Be very careful. If we push too many of those words before they're ready, these young students will compensate with trying to memorize them. And we know now that is definitely not what we want. So that's one caution kind of on the younger side. With the older students, they've reached the consolidated phase of reading that Airy describes. So they're able to decode at the single phoneme level and in chunks. So with those older students, I like to use the same process, but group similar words together so that we can get the most bang for our buck. I know how the demands on teachers and their time is so much. So just think about teaching words like much, such, and which together when teaching the CH or the TCH spelling pattern, or grouping words together like live and give when teaching the silent E pattern. So grouping those words helps us attend to more of the words, but it also helps the students make sense of those orthographic patterns, because again, I would be teaching those alongside a phonics pattern. And then the other thing I love to do with older students is to explain the why of those irregular spellings. So this is etymology, word origin, and they really enjoy learning why many of our word spellings don't match the pronunciation. Using that word come that we discussed earlier, I explained to my students that in Old English, the scribes used to write in a very thin and slanted cursive with the letters really close to one another. So it was difficult to read the vowel U when it was next to an M. It just kind of got lost, for example, in the word come. So the scribes simply substituted an O for the U so that the word could be read more easily. Now, how lovely for us, because that makes it hard. And back then, the pronunciation of the vowel was also more like a long vowel sound. I mean, that just blew my mind when I learned that. So the spelling in the word come remained, even though we now pronounce it with a short vowel sound. So these little layers of why these irregular words exist is another amazing addition that I use with older students.
The history of English is just so fascinating. And I think
Fascinating.
tidbits, especially about scribal O, just stick with kids. And instead of just saying, this is irregular, you're giving a reason why. And those are the stories that will stick with them and then make them curious of another word that perhaps does that. Oh, I wonder if that's a scribal O as well. And it just sends you down a little rabbit hole, and it's very cool.
It sure does.
And I appreciate your tip of the hat to kindergarten work or early educator work with a high frequency word instruction or irregular word instruction, and just being mindful of being developmentally appropriate. And a lot of times kindergarten is hard these days. I look at some of the standards and it's like, oh my goodness, if only we could just really solidify that alphabetic principle and phonemic awareness, like we could move mountains, right?
Absolutely. I know we used to have a letter a week in kindergarten, and that was our focus. There was no reading. I mean, it's amazing. So yes, it's quite different landscape now.
So different. So we really have to make sure that they have some of those other foundations in place before we start pushing these words at them, because memorization is a hard habit to break. If you get to second grade, third grade, and you see kids just guess at words, you're like, no, the clue is in the word. Look at the word.
Oh, not just the first letter.
Exactly. And I also love that tip for your upper elementary about grouping words, because at that point we need some acceleration. So any way we could get more and more and more at them at once and intensify that word recognition instruction is going to be really powerful. So this was all so wonderful for the educator who is really feeling excited right now about taking the reins of their high frequency word instruction, maybe in a different way. What kind of advice do you have to give as a starting point?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say kind of on that larger macro level, like you mentioned, if you could start by matching your word instruction to your phonics scope and sequence, that would be amazing. So I would say ditch the random Dolch list and start integrating those high frequency words into your phonics lessons. And start small. Don't try to do it all at once. You could pick 5 words and try, I call it the pop method that we talked through, and just see, what does it feel like to weave in context? What does it look like to apply those irregular words in phrases to read and spell and sentences? What does it look like to bunch several of them together, like we mentioned? So just start small so that you don't get into overwhelm, and just see how you do. There are, the ways to just make it very concrete and simple. But like you mentioned, not every word is the same. So it's also that structured flexibility to give yourself that, we're just going to take it one word at a time.
One word at a time. I love it. So Pryor, that was so lovely chatting with you today. I feel like I could talk to you all day long.
Same here.
I am sure that my listeners would love to connect with you further. So if they want to hear more about the POP method or maybe find you on social media, share all of your outlets with us.
Right. Yes. So on Instagram, I am Orton Gillingham Mama, and I know that is a mouthful. And then I also have a blog on my website. So that is www.ortongillinghammama.com. So, I have free resources there. I mentioned I've got 2 online courses, one about how to do exactly what we talked about, how to teach sight words using, the context, the meaning, how to make more of the heart word method, and how to group those words if you need help by phonics skill. So it's really exciting time. I love working with teachers on, sight words. And then again, how do you weave that into all the amazing instruction that you're already doing?
Wonderful. We could link that all in the show notes. So
Great.
I appreciate you and thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.